We need to enable natural gas as the bridge to a nuclear future. What's kind of cool about this is, yes, it's going to create a lot more carbon consumption in the short term to get to a carbon-free outcome much more quickly than would have happened if not driven by this, not just AI, but this new technological demand driven by EVs, AI, the electrical consumption demand that we're getting across the country is not just data centers, but we have this opportunity to make that an economic advantage, not something we should be scared of. Like if you want to enable a lot of new nuclear, there needs to be a commercially viable outcome that returns on an investment. And we can do that without government subsidies or without many of them. It's not like solar and wind, which often doesn't pencil without a big tax break on. Like this can be all done in a commercially viable way that isn't on the taxpayer.
Haynes Strader, how you doing, man?
I'm good. Good to see you, Conrad. Thanks for having me.
Man, I appreciate you coming on, taking the time today.
Of course. It's good to slow down for just a minute.
You're a busy man these days.
It's crazy. But
it's a good thing, right?
It is good.
I always like to tell folks like how we met, and I think we were just out talking about him, but I think it was Brian Marsh that introduced us several years ago, a long time ago.
Yeah.
You were still at CB way back in the day.
That's right.
And I think we just had lunch and then, kept in touch. And then we had a bunch of friends in common. And
well, I think the first time we actually hung out and it was fun and it wasn't like a business lunch was with Art at a concert at House of Blues. I think it was Robert Earl Keen.
Oh, you're right.
I'm pretty sure that was the first time we had a beer and actually had a good time.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a great time. Speaking of which, Robert Earl is coming back.
I saw that.
And around Christmas. And I was like, I got to get online and buy tickets again.
That was a good deal. That was a good deal.
He's so great.
Yeah,
he's so great. But yeah, so we've known each other for a while. You were a broker for a long time at CB. Now you were chief development officer. Is that correct?
It's just fireman going wherever the nearest fire is.
Yes.
Yeah, that's it.
So we're going to dive all things in the Haynes Strader and the data center world here in a little bit. But what I love to tell people a little bit is kind of like your background and how what your upbringing was and kind of how that shaped you today. I mean, tell the audience a little bit about Haynes Strader.
Sure. Yeah, I was born here in Dallas, so I am technically a Dallas native, but my whole family's from North Carolina.
Yep.
And my dad, after he got out of college, he was an attorney for a couple of years, and then he ended up working at Trammell Crow with Pryor Blackwell and Chuck Anderson and Tom Lizer and all those guys. And that's important later in the story. But Dad, we moved to North Carolina. Dad went to what's now Prologis Security Capital Industrial Trust in Charlotte. And so we lived in Charlotte, Winston-Salem, Raleigh. And then and Dad had a couple different career opportunities in between Charlotte and Raleigh. And then he went back to Prologis and we moved to Atlanta my sophomore year of high school. So I moved around a lot. So I went from kindergarten to graduation. I was in 6 different schools.
Man.
And so it was 5 or 6, maybe 5 schools. And I didn't love that as a kid. That was tough.
I can imagine. That is tough.
And I didn't get into Wake. I really wanted to go to Wake Forest. And I didn't get into Wake. And I got into a couple other really good schools. And my dad was like, but they were big schools. And my dad was like, why are you looking at these big state schools if what you liked was Wake Forest? He's like, you should look at something smaller. You should go look at SMU. I was like, well, Dad, I don't want to be a preacher. And he's like, no, it's great. And I remember my best friend in high school, he was from New Orleans and he had a bunch of buddies that, they do Tulane and SMU and all that. And he goes, well, Haynes, that's the Southern Millionaires University. And I was like, what? I'd never heard of it. And I flew in and my parents set me up with a couple of KAs that I had, we didn't really know that well. I don't remember. It was like friends of friends of friends.
Yeah.
And I got in a cab, went to campus, and I had them drop me off at the Meadows Museum, which is, beautiful, largest Spanish art gallery, largest collection of Spanish art in the United States is there.
Did not know that fun fact.
And so it's beautiful. I'm walking around like, wow, this is real pretty. It's a museum. It's nice. And I'm texting these KA guys. I'm like, hey, I'm here. I'm at the Meadows Museum. And they're like, where the hell is the Meadows Museum? You know, and they ended up.
They're like, we're at the Barley House.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. And so they found me. And I mean, the very first girl I met was, you know, just more stunning than any woman I'd ever run across in North Carolina. And I was quickly converted that SMU was where I wanted to go. And so by the time I left at the end of that weekend, I had my application in and I got in. Those were days where SMU was a little easier to get into, but I got in. I had a phenomenal experience. All of the moving around really paid off my freshman year of college. I didn't know anybody. I had the skill set of like how to make friends, and you know, the first 3 weeks were hard, but after that it really started to click. I got real involved with Greek life. I was an SAE, and I'm one of the advisors for the SAEs now. You know, ended up getting involved with IFC, was the student member on the board of trustees my senior year. So I had a lot of leadership opportunities while I was at SMU, and SMU really empowered me to, I think a lot bigger than I had ever thought possible. It was a different world. Dallas was a different planet than Raleigh, North Carolina, and I love the Carolinas.
Sure,
but I fell in love with Texas and with Dallas, and I think
that campus is also so beautiful.
It's amazing.
It's amazing.
And I also wasn't a huge sports fan, and I think we won 3 football games my first 3 years combined at SMU, and then we got June Jones my senior year, and the energy got a lot better. But I'm totally converted now. I'm a big SMU sports fan. But so anyway, so I had had a great time at SMU, enjoyed that, and ended up going and doing Teach for America right out of college here in Dallas. I was in Arlington. So I taught 6th grade English for 2 years with the Uplift schools. And, you know, I think I went in very confidently that I was just going to fix education in the United States in about 2 weeks.
Right.
And I had a bunch of 12-year-olds just kick my ass for 2 years. But I learned a lot, and it was a humbling, good experience. I'm still close with a lot of my students now in their 20s, which is crazy. But that was a really good experience. And then ultimately, I took a job in consulting, doing sales for a consulting shop for a year. Didn't love that, but knew I didn't love it kind of early on, and I started kind of seeking out guidance from a lot of mentors, both from SMU and just around Dallas. And one of the most helpful, and probably the most helpful, was Tom Leiser over at Bandera Ventures. And Tom, he really helped me open a lot of doors in the real estate world. And I ended up interviewing with Rob Morris, both through Tom, with Rob Morris, who had started Skybox like a week before that. And it was him and Travis in a pickup truck, and that was they had one project they were working on. And that afternoon, I went and interviewed with Mike Lafitte at CBRE.
Sure.
And Rob was like, sure, you can come work for me, but I can't pay you, and I have no idea what you would do. And Mike Lafitte asked me, you know, what I thought real estate development was, and I don't remember what I said, but it was probably the worst answer he's ever gotten. He's like, I don't know, you seem like you've got good energy. Why don't you go downstairs and learn what real estate is before you talking? And Blair Oden and Chris Hips offered me a job literally like that day. And so I was in the wheel program at CB, and that's kind of how I got into real estate. But that all, you know, Tom and the Bandera guys, I mean, I've known them since I was born, you know, and so it was really cool, full circle opportunity, and I think that speaks to just what Dallas is all about. It's such a network, you know?
For sure. Well, I mean, that's interesting. You know, your dad was obviously in industrial real estate, so you're around real estate your entire childhood. Did you always know growing up, like, that's the direction I want to go? Did you think that?
No, I think I wanted to do whatever was farthest away from that as possible, which I think it's funny how that turned out, because it ended up pretty close, pretty close as you could get without it being pure industrial.
That's right.
But I had a probably relatively childish perspective on the whole thing, and it's like, I mean, I would view it the same way. I took French from kindergarten through, you know, senior year of high school.
Right.
And then I got to college. I was like, I'm going to take Spanish and do something different. And that's the only C I ever made in college was Spanish. If I just taken French, I would have made an A. So, you know, I think leaning into what you know is not necessarily a bad thing. And as it's turned out, you know, Prologis is one of our, nothing to do directly with my dad, but he certainly helped make an important introduction early in my career that led to an opportunity for Skybox to work with Prologis, which has been really cool.
Yeah. No, that's neat. And then I've heard this story about the wheel program. So you get in the wheel program, and if anybody doesn't know what that is, that means you basically touch every asset class at CB, right?
Yeah.
You do a little time in retail, multifamily, industrial, office, and CB had data center.
Yeah. Well, it's actually the most important thing I did in the wheel program was research. They start you in research.
Okay.
And what I realized quickly is that research is an art, not a science. And where a lot of this data, data can be interpreted different ways.
Right.
And, obviously, facts are facts, but where that information is coming from, how valid that information is, how, what's absorption versus leasing, how those different terms can apply and what that can mean in a market is important. And I learned that quick. I just quickly realized like how all that data got aggregated and that there is an art to piecing that together to tell a narrative.
Sure.
And that served me really well throughout my real estate career. It's probably one of the most important things I learned.
Interesting.
Was in the research group. But data centers was not originally part of my rotation.
Okay.
And I had just done an office GWS rotation. I'd done retail, and I'd done one industrial team. And I liked all of it. I enjoyed everybody I got to work with. But Rob Morris at Skybox, who I had interviewed with, I kept up with him during that whole period of time. And he just kept saying, you really got to get to know the data center guys. And so I took Burnett and Chris Herman to coffee and asked them if I could, rotate on.
Yeah.
And I don't think that was the hardest thing for them to say no or yes to, because it was a free intern. But they said yes. And I mean, within a week, I knew it was the right fit. And I think Brant Burnett and Chris Herman are two of the best human beings I've ever had the opportunity to know and much less work for. And I knew I could learn a lot from them, not just from a business perspective, but just as a human being and how to be a good parent, how to be a good husband, those types of things.
Yeah,
and,
that's awesome.
So they were hugely important to me at that point in my life and continue to be to this day.
Sure.
But I got in there. David Liggett had left probably 9 months before I got onto their team.
Okay.
To start Data Center Hawk.
Right.
Which has been really successful. But that, I think by the time I got to Brant and Chris, they were just up to their eyeballs in work.
Yeah, they needed help.
And just a warm body and a desk was helpful. And so what was cool was I was immediately adding value without a clue of what I was doing. Right. And I was enjoying it. And so they gave me a really good opportunity. And I stopped rotating after that. I just stuck with them.
No, I know. Our good buddy Jack Fraker was disappointed because I think you were supposed to be.
He was next.
Yeah. He was next on the rotation, and he thought, well, God, his dad's been in industrial. He's going to be part of my team, and I love hearing that story from Jack because that it's funny though that how things work out in life.
Yeah, and I would have learned a lot, I'm sure, with national partners for sure. But, yes, I just it was a good niche, and I was. Yep. I was also, the wheel program is traditionally for kids right out of college. And I did Teach for America right out of college and then had a job for a year. So I was 3 years out.
Yep.
And by somebody didn't graduate from UT on time. And that was the only reason there was an opening in the wheel program, and they weren't even going to fill it. And so I kind of skipped the whole interview process haphazardly, not intentionally.
Right.
But by the time I had this interview in August, they're like, hey, we've got this opening and we don't have time. They weren't going to fill it. And so they just, Blair Oden and Chris Hips just saw that I was going to work hard, and they threw me in it.
That's so great.
I really appreciated that opportunity.
Wow. So you get you're with the data center team. What are you doing, your first few years as part of the data center team? Yeah, it started off, so primarily the primary business for where we started or at least when I started in 2014 was tenant rep business. So and a lot of that was telecom, like assets like the Infomart that had kind of become data centers. And so we had a lot of big enterprise telecom companies that we would represent in those types of assets. And those were really interesting deals because it was really expensive kind of powered shell real estate, but it wasn't pure data center. It was kind of this blended. Yep.
But it was complicated. Understanding how the network worked, understanding how the backup power worked. These leases were often like 20 years old and had been kind of, since the telecom days, all these companies had it had started as 20 leases and been converged down to one with all these companies kind of concentrating together. And so that was kind of where I started cutting my teeth on the tenant rep business, and then site selection. Our first client, my first big client with Brant was J.P. Morgan, and doing what at the time was called Project Sycamore, which was a data center site selection project for the J.P. Morgan team that we ran nationally for them, and so they were buying land.
Yeah.
But that was kind of like going to Harvard Business School for data center site selection. I mean, the JPMC team, their real estate team was extremely sharp, their data center team was extremely sharp, and their expectations were up to here. And so you had to perform. Like there was not an option to have a subpar day. And,
right.
And Brant, I mean, he threw me in the fire and trusted me with a lot of that, and we did a lot of hard work together. But Brant I learned a lot from him on that. He spent an ungodly amount of time just on whether, looking at mineral rights, looking at, easements and water lines and all that stuff, but really understanding the power of the 4 sites we bought. Only one of them was actually listed. Everything else was off market. Yep. And so figuring out how to just create, and these were big, 100+ acre deals.
Yep.
In complicated markets. And so that really taught me the site selection business, which has served me well through the rest of my career. On the tenant rep side, it was like at the end of my first year, I won't mention who it was, but one of now Skybox's competitors had a flood at one of their properties, and so I cold called 700 tenants in that building, or maybe it wasn't 700, it was probably 70 tenants in that building, and I got 2 of them to relocate. And so that was my first real success as a cold caller. Yeah, was getting and they were they're small deals. I mean, especially in today's world, they're retail deals, but it was 6-figure commissions on both of those transactions, which was really exciting.
Sure.
And Brant, I think that's when Brant and Chris were like, okay, let's ramp this up a little bit. And so we had a really good run. We ended up representing everything from retail colo providers that were leasing space, so they would be bigger deals, to large telecom enterprises, and eventually towards the end of it, we represented a couple of the hyperscalers on some of their projects, mostly site selection oriented.
Yep.
But the best part was we also started doing investment sales, and so I was getting to do a lot of different transaction types under one asset class. And so I got to know all the big investors in our space, all the big landlords in our space, many of the big tenants in our space. And it was a really small world. There just weren't many guys doing this. And so, I often wasn't the guy throwing the football in the hallway or going to the Mavs games or all that. I was sitting at my desk, talking to somebody about Star Wars, in Silicon Valley, that's how I could relate to them. And ultimately, I think...
Tatooine?
Oh, yeah. Most of our Skybox projects quietly have Star Wars affiliations.
That is hilarious.
But Brant and Chris, I think what they did for me that was most empowering was they let me kind of build my own brand. So I ran our research for the Texas market, which was super helpful. So I knew exactly where we were on leasing and absorption and supply and capacity and who had what, and I knew it like the back of my hand. And so when we'd talk to reporters or things like that, Brant and Chris would give me an opportunity to also be a part of that, which a lot of the other senior brokers wouldn't do that for a lot of their junior guys, and that it helped me kind of. I got to go speak at conferences. As I grew in my career, I just had more and more opportunities like that. And once we got in the investment sales business, that actually became really important, because if we were talking to an investor, they could Google Haynes or Google CBRE Texas, and stuff would pop up with our name, with my name on it, as well as Brant and Chris. And so I think that really helped along the line of just kind of building validity around what we were doing.
Sure. So how long were you part of the team over there?
Just under 7 years. So it was 2014 to literally Christmas of 20. Well, really, December 31st, 2020.
Okay. Almost going on 4 years since you've been gone then, huh?
Yeah, getting close. Yeah.
Getting close.
Yeah.
So you get a ton of reps over there. What is the catalyst to saying, I'm going to leave kind of this brokerage world and go into the development, side of the business? Like, how did that all come together? It sounds like you and Rob continued to stay on you, maybe. Yeah,
well, we were always close. So, and more importantly than Rob, honestly, so Rob and Travis didn't hire me. They hired Gordon Kellerman, who they had worked with previously at Cassidy and Cushman.
Okay.
And Gordon and I were very close friends from freshman year in college. And so Gordon and I started our first company together when we were at SMU with Robert Tobolowsky called Dallas Pedicabs, which was wildly successful by not losing money. We ended up, I think we broke even at the end of the day, not counting the time and value of money. But
were y'all shuttling people back and forth from Barley House?
Rickshaws. That we physically weren't.
Right.
Gordon would occasionally hop on if we had a driver out of commission, but really where the money was weddings. We did a ton of weddings.
Interesting.
And then it'd be like, the Dallas Safari Club, and like it was important to have a concentration of things.
Sure.
And the real golden ticket there was to get. There's a lottery system to do rickshaws for Arlington for the Cowboys and Rangers, and we just never won.
No kidding.
Never won the lottery. We did. We eventually sold the company, and the guy that bought it won the lottery the next year. He also owns most of the other rickshaws. I think there's some squirrely stuff going on around out there. But they, anyways, we were glad to get out, and we were glad that he's had a successful business since then. But it was a great learning experience. Gordon and I had, be a junior in college and you've got some driver that doesn't show up for a wedding and you got to scramble and figure it out.
You already had the entrepreneur bug, early in life.
Yeah. I think I've always wanted to, I'm happy to, I'm great with structure. It's very helpful if I have some structure.
Okay.
But give me a bone and just tell me what you want the end objective to be and I'll go figure it out. And I don't necessarily have to be my own boss. I like having people. I like working for Rob and Travis. I liked working for Brant and Chris. It gives me structure and kind of guidance on where to focus my energy.
Yeah.
But I'm very good at execution, and I've always been like that, as long as it's directed the right way. But that's served me well, and I think I didn't necessarily know I wanted to be a developer. I don't know that was it. I loved doing deals. I liked doing creative deals, and I liked being able to dictate kind of. I think what Brant and Chris were really good at was focusing on what the customer need was, and then building the deal around that need, as opposed to trying to say, here are your options.
Yeah.
Force your need into that.
Yeah.
We just got really creative and said yes to a bunch of things that other people might have said no to go figure it out. Skybox is very similar to that. I think Skybox has been super bespoke in how they've approached the market. And I had the opportunity to broker several deals with Skybox, including buying 6815 Communications, which was the Skybox Legacy 1 asset. I was the buyer's rep broker, so I had to sit on the opposite side of the table.
Yep.
And that was a big deal for them at the time. It was a big deal for me too. And they were so wonderful to negotiate with. Travis is hard to negotiate with, but it's way better on his side of the table. But the reality is, like, if they shook hands on something, they meant it, and they stuck to it, often to their own detriment. They might have had an opportunity to retrade or do something, they just didn't, and that was rare in our industry. Yeah. And our client walked out super happy and feeling good about it. I think they did what was right by the customer through and through on every transaction. And then the last deal I did while I was at CBE was I got to represent Skybox in selling their Houston asset with Brant and Chris and Rob Factoro in Northern Virginia and Josh Greenberg. And that was the most fun deal I think I've ever gotten to work on, just because I got to represent my future partners, but also just two guys that I really respected. And and it was great. That was a great transaction. But that I think, having not had the work where we kind of decided we'd work together was after. We didn't decide at that time, but after we closed the communications Parkway deal, I think it was a year later, we went on like a celebratory trip with Rob and Gordon and Travis and me and our wives. Yep. And we just all got along really, really well. And I think it clicked with all of us that, hey, like, I don't know where it is or when it is, but we got to do something together. Yeah. And what really drove that opportunity was in that same year, in 2018, same year we did that deal, I was hired by Prologis as a consultant to help them figure out how to get into the data center business. And so we spent several years looking across thousands of assets. And, I was able to help be a part of their process of getting into this space. And ultimately, Prologis selected Skybox as one of their partners, along with Yonder in Europe and some others. But I got this opportunity to go see that through. And that was really what brought me to Skybox, was the opportunity to kind of see that relationship come to fruition. And it's just been amazing both for us and for Prologis and for our clients, what that's enabled from a scale and speed and just our first building from that partnership delivered and was handed over the tenant about 2 weeks ago.
Wow.
And so that was
great.
very, very exciting.
Was that the one down in Hutto? Is that right?
Can't tell you which one it is.
No,
but it's one of ours in Texas. Yeah.
Got it. So when you come on to Skybox, like you said you love structure. What do they tell you, like, Haynes, this is what we need to do? Like, where are y'all? And so much has changed in the last 4 years as well on this data center front.
I think I thought going into development was going to be easier than brokerage, which was a dramatic misunderstanding on my part. It's crazy how complicated all this stuff is.
Yep.
And I didn't appreciate a lot of that going into it. But I do think what I saw the opportunity is I was dealing with all of these investors that wanted to get in the data center space.
Yep.
And there were very limited opportunities. There were 4 or 5 companies that were publicly traded, and most of those have now been taken private. There were a handful of developers out there, but most of them were married to some large private equity group.
Yep.
And Skybox was still independently owned and still is by the partners. And, could kind of pick the deals it wanted to work on and just had a lot of autonomy around how to approach the space. And I think that was super attractive to me because I felt like I could really help Skybox get in front of a lot of those capital partners and help them see how big of an opportunity there was out there to really scale. And I think from Skybox's perspective, they had spent a long time really honing their craft and becoming the best, becoming masters of what they do by not taking on too much and by really focusing on just being the very best on the projects that they were on. And so, their projects were some of the best ones I've ever toured. I mean, you'd go into a tour with those guys and the level of detail and just perfectionism that surrounded kind of every question, every site plan that you saw, every RFP response was so detailed. I'm a big 88% guy. Like if you can get to an 88, you're good enough. Just go on to the next one. Rob's 120% guy. So we've kind of balanced, if it's not perfect and triple checked 7 times over, it's not going out the door. And so I think we have some good balance there on.
Sure.
But I think at the end of the day, that was the opportunity I saw. I don't know what Rob and Travis saw in me, but the first thing I just remember the very first day I walked in, Rob pulls me in and he's like, Haynes, I want you to work on this. I don't have time. It's really important. And it was negotiating a GC contract, which I had never done as a broker. And honestly, I learned a lot through that process, but the best part about that was all that needed was someone to actually focus on it, ask a few questions, understand the issues, and drive the process. We had smart attorneys involved on both sides. Obviously, the GC knew what they were doing. The development guys on our side knew what they were doing. But just driving a process to get to it. Here's when this needs to get done by. Get everybody to an agreement like that. And I excel at that kind of stuff. And so I think that's where that's kind of where a lot of my day-to-day comes in, is it's just like, what is the nearest term issue that we don't have enough bandwidth on? How can I go help solve that? Yeah. And I spend a lot of my time on that. But ultimately, my role is site selection. I partner with Travis on our capital management. So raising capital, managing our capital partners, creating new opportunities for capital partners is a lot of my time. And then sales and marketing, I partner with Gordon, who runs our sales and marketing, really customer management. Yeah. So we're super lean. We're sub 40 people, not including operations. And for the volume of work we have in our space, that's unheard of. And so it's a great. We're very high touch with our investors, with our partners, and with our clients, and everybody's a part of that. It's not. Yeah. It's not very siloed. It's everybody kind of digs in where they need to contribute.
So you start 4 years ago. How many? Can we talk about numbers of projects you guys are working on?
We have 9 projects across the country. It's about 1,400 megawatts of capacity that's committed.
Okay, that's amazing.
We've got a pipeline that's hopefully about twice that, but that's a big big question mark because it's, you really don't know until you have the power. And I think we're in a situation where that's going to be a volatile process over the next several years. So
it is.
Yeah, but the beauty of it is by staying small, we're not going to do bad projects. We're going to do stuff that we want to do and that we're excited about. And we're not forced to do anything, which is kind of nice.
Yep. Well, everybody's been obviously reading the headlines about data centers and it blowing up and, AI being the major driver here of a lot of this. Let's talk about power a little bit. I mean, is everybody frozen pretty much across the United States right now? Is that just a regional thing? Is it,
It's definitely regional. So, it's not just like state by state, it's city by city, market, submarket by submarket. So, the grid is a complicated system.
Yep.
And how generation works versus transmission versus distribution they're each their own issues. And I think the reality is there's plenty of opportunity left on the grid for reasonable requests, for crazy stuff. I mean, I think folks that are trying to go tie up 4 or 5 gigawatts at a time that don't understand the space should really just stop because it's not. It's only hurting the entire market, and it's ultimately going to weed those people out from the opportunities. Is there an opportunity to go sign up a 4 or 5 gigawatt deal? Maybe, but if you do, you need to come up with $40 to $50 billion of capital. So I mean, I don't know who's. I mean, the biggest private equity shops in the world that's their whole platform right now is at that valuation. So I think we just need to be realistic around what are you really trying to accomplish and what are you actually capable of accomplishing versus, or what are you actually capable of delivering on versus just trying to go for these really big numbers. And I think that's really frustrating for the utilities because they all have a duty to serve, and it's hard for them to vet out what's real and what's not real. So we're really close with all of the utilities that we work with, and we're working closely with them on figuring out, are there fair ways to, create not necessarily barriers, but guardrails to make sure that requests are real, that the groups can actually perform, that this power is going to get consumed. Because at the end of the day, the last thing you want is a giant oversupply of power that never gets consumed. That's not good for anybody. And so what you want is real generation that bolsters the overall grid, that's subsidized by credit-worthy consumers that can actually buy the power and use it.
Yep. So is Texas and the U.S. actively expanding the generation? Like, are we building plants right now? I mean, what's the plans there?
We're going to see
to
a lot.
meet the needs of all this demand.
Yeah, we're going to see. I hope we see a lot more of it. The reality is Texas is better positioned than anywhere almost in the world. Texas, China, Russia, Brazil are the places that probably have the most access to energy anywhere in the globe right now that's fast. Texas is the largest producer of renewables in the world.
Right.
In the United States, largest producer of renewables in the United States.
Yeah.
It's also has the largest natural gas resources anywhere in the country. It also has the capability to enable a lot more nuclear if we wanted to. We've got a lot of land, and nuclear's pretty simple. You just need land and space and some buffer. We've got great high voltage transmission system around the state. There's very real talk about improving that and increasing the amount of high voltage transmission around the state. So Texas, I think, is well positioned if we can enable new generation. But the key is getting through permitting, particularly around natural gas with the EPA, and ensuring that we can actually permit these new assets. There's current litigation happening right now around some new rules around new generation. But we need to recognize that, first, all of this growth is not random companies just like creating technology that they think someone's going to use. Like, it's all being driven by actual consumer demand today.
Yeah.
We're using these products every single day. Our exponential growth in the use of technology that we're experiencing as a society, not just here in the United States, but around the world, it dramatically exceeds the amount of compute capacity that we actually have to serve it. And so the reality is, like, the demand signals that these big companies are getting to go build these hyperscale campuses is coming from consumers. Yep. It's coming from demand that they're seeing it's you and
people
me.
Don't realize how much AI is really on your phone every day.
All the time.
Like even just down to like your mapping functions.
100%. And it's not just you as a person, it's if you think about like automated cars,
Right.
the amount of intelligence that's going to have to be communicated from machine to machine to machine before a
Yes.
human even interfaces with it is dramatic. And to grow that to a place where it's actually going to work at scale, I think we've all been on ChatGPT or
Sure.
know, Gemini or whatever the platform
Yeah.
is and not been super impressed with sometimes. I mean, some of it's amazing, but sometimes the answers come back and you're like, well, that's not really that good.
Right.
Part of that is just the computer's not big enough. We don't have the compute infrastructure built out to do these algorithms at where the actual software technology exists to enable it. And so we've got to build the hardware infrastructure to support the capability. And that's not even considering like the national security implications that all of this stuff has.
Right.
I mean, that's where, when you think about the future of military applications as it relates to AI, I mean, that's a huge topic to unpack. And it's super important that the United States wins that and that the Western world wins that. And I think, we're maybe a year ahead technologically from China or some of our other competitors across the globe.
Yeah.
But they're going to empower this energy generation using dirty coal and other resources that aren't great for the environment at great scale if we don't come up with superior technology faster. And so to me it's imperative that we enable this new energy generation to power this new compute so that the United States retains both from a commercial and economic viability standpoint that we want the best technology in the world, to a military and national security standpoint, we need to be able to both have the defensive and offensive capabilities to be the best in the world like we've been for the last 100 years.
I mean, what's the number of how many generation places China's building right now?
I mean, they don't disclose it, but
disclose,
you're talking hundreds of coal plants under construction right now around the country.
I bet you they get their permits probably in about a week too.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that we should. That's kind of the awesome thing about America. I'm not saying that we should go shirk the important parts of going through a permitting. Permitting is important. It's important that we get through these processes efficiently, but to
we can't be
fail
waiting
to recognize
5 years or 7 years or 10 years to get these facilities up and running.
We need to enable natural gas as the bridge to a nuclear future, which is how you're going to get. What's kind of cool about this is, yes, it's going to create a lot more carbon consumption in the short term to get to a carbon-free outcome, much more quickly than it would have happened if not driven by this, not just AI, but this new technological demand driven by EVs, AI. The electrical consumption demand that we're getting across the country is not just data centers, but we have this opportunity to make that an economic advantage, not something we should be scared of. Like if you want to enable a lot of new nuclear, there needs to be a commercially viable outcome that returns on an investment. And we can do that without government subsidies. I mean, without many of them. It's not like solar and wind, which often doesn't pencil without a big tax break on it. Like this can be all done in a commercially viable way that isn't on the taxpayer. And so I think we have to think about it holistically and from a recognition that if we don't do it here with clean natural gas, with nuclear, it will happen elsewhere around the world with much more dangerous,
people.
Well, more dangerous people and less high quality. Worse carbon footprint.
Worse carbon. For sure.
If you believe in that, which I do, climate change is going to get worse before it gets better.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you feel like Texas is well positioned? One, because obviously we have all these renewables here and so much natural gas, but we should be able to get through the permitting process because of the lack of the regulations that we see in other states sometimes.
The most of the regulation that's an issue is at the federal level. It's federal EPA targets that we're dealing with. And again, the goal is not just to go blast a bunch of dirty air. It's just you've got to, natural gas creates carbon. And so we've just got to acknowledge that. But it creates a lot less carbon than coal and other resources.
Sure.
And ultimately, you can convert natural gas plants to use hydrogen, which is clean, explosive, but clean. And you can also do carbon capture. You have to figure out how to sequester carbon capture. And I think that's the big issue right now is the EPA is suggesting that that any new nat gas plant should have to use carbon capture once it hits a certain point. The problem is we don't have the infrastructure set up. That takes pipelines, to transport the carbon. It takes sequestration sites to put carbon into the ground. Like, we can get there, but it's just not financially viable today. Right this second. 5 years from now, I think it's very realistic. But if you don't have the financial motivation to build the plants, to consume the energy, why would you build the carbon capture technology?
Right.
So again, we've got to get there from a demand threshold.
Okay. So we need some change in DC, possibly.
Yes. But I do think people are coming to Texas in droves, not just because we have a lot of energy and data centers are coming, but it is a regulatory environment you can work with. I mean, the state is here; they are open for business. Of course, legislators are concerned about their constituents and how these things impact their communities, but you can go have a discussion. It's not a closed door.
Right.
And I think a big part of that is ERCOT has been really, really responsible and how they're planning and forecasting around this stuff, which has not always been true in other markets around the country where they've run into some of these issues.
Yeah.
And they've just taken on way more demand than they actually could either generate for or create transmission for within a reasonable amount of time. And so I think ERCOT is really thinking about this stuff and is being very strategic and not allowing themselves to get out too far in front of their skis.
Yep. Number I've heard is 184 gigawatts of requests at Encore and only about 80 to give out. Does that sound about right?
I don't know what they can give out. That doesn't surprise me on the demand amount. I mean, the reality is the entire Texas grid right now runs at about 90 gigawatts. So it's two times the Texas grid. So I don't. Yeah. I think the demand is huge.
Well, and like we had talked about,
responsibly create
there's not all this number that I first threw out. There's a lot of people that are chasing power that really don't have great sites and are making requests and ultimately will not be a viable player down the road.
Yeah, the utilities have a duty to serve, so they're gonna take every request seriously, and they have to do that. I think the challenge is this has been an art for a while that data center operators and developers have understood, and now we're in this market where a lot of the rest of the real estate market is softened, and so you've got a lot of guys just looking for the next best thing. Yeah, and it's created a lot of
all these industrial guys now chasing that.
Yeah, well,
it's like the office guys that came into the industrial
worst
world.
We've got to worry about. We're okay. It's like we've got like senior housing people doing data center deals all of a sudden. But it's I think I think there's a lot of phantom load in what's being requested that's not real. And so I think that will work. Again, I think ERCOT's being very responsible in how they're doing this. I know Encore is thinking about this stuff the right way, and AEP, and so that will work itself out over time. But it's certainly hard. I mean, it's hard to get through that process efficiently right now.
Let's just talk about, for those that aren't really ingrained in the data center world, I mean, let's talk about how the data center has just changed so much. Let's just call it in the last 3-4 years.
Sure.
Like the deals that you used to chase in your CB days or your beginnings at Skybox, and talk about those, and then talk a little bit about what it looks like today, right now, in terms of size and demand. And
the scale has changed, but there's a reason for that. The efficiency you get clustering these compute loads near one another, both from a utility perspective. So think about you can get so much more power in one location, then you don't have to distribute it with all these power lines everywhere. It's easier if you can get right off high voltage and build at scale. You can aggregate all of your network there, all of the things that make, just like if you have a desktop computer in your house, you've probably got it somewhere that's pretty convenient to where all those cords end up plugging in. Mm-hmm. If you had 20 desktops all around your house, it'd be a real pain to distribute all the power and Ethernet cables, right?
Yep.
It's the exact same concept, just at much greater scale.
Yep.
And so that's the I think the shift we've seen in the way compute works. We've moved from relatively low density enterprise compute to kind of middle to now some high density high performance cloud computes. Think your box folders, your Dropbox, your email. Cloud is anything that's happening on a device that's not your own, but it's being distributed. So storage, that kind of thing. Xbox, Microsoft just announced Xbox is going to no longer have consoles in the next iteration. So you'll have a controller, you'll be able to play it on your TV, but you'll be basically streaming your video game experience from a Microsoft server sitting in a data center somewhere.
Yep.
So you're going to see a lot more of that and we are seeing a lot more of it as cloud technology kind of has evolved. So cloud demand has driven a lot of that. And then AI, which is basically really high performance computation, is driving just tremendous growth. So all of those things kind of aggregated together is why you're seeing it. But campuses are just much more efficient than single buildings or co-located facilities for doing
that. I mean, it went from, let's just say, doing a 10 to 20 acre deal. now you want 100, 200, 300. I mean, what's the largest campus or land grab you've heard of in the last?
Yeah, so I've seen things that are 1,000 acres, but I think the reality is it's going both directions. So you're going bigger to have more buffer, to have more flexibility in design, to make sure you've got the right roads. And now, these campuses get big enough, you've actually got a healthy amount of employees there. So you might have 100 or 200 people on campus every day, security centers, having some kind of common area.
Sure.
That's becoming more normal. But the reality is the density is also going way up. And so you can put way more computers in a much smaller building than you used to be able to.
Yes.
So you're seeing both. So like in some cases you're using all of the campus for a handful of assets, and in some cases, or for one or two buildings, in some cases you might be able to put 6 or 7 buildings in the same footprint. So it just kind of depends on the density of the customer.
Yeah. It's all customer driven on.
Yeah.
It's very
But it's more about power. It's how much power do you have in the design kind of around that. But yeah, we try to kind of stick to a 100-acre minimum.
Yeah.
And more than 300 acres starts to become kind of cumbersome.
And now you're building them 2-3 stories tall, right? So that the computers are like latency, you're getting better latency.
We've gone up to 4 stories in some of the coastal markets, but we're traditionally 1 or 2 stories.
Yeah.
It's just easier.
Yeah. That's exciting.
It's good. It's good. And you're seeing, because there's so much demand, the supply demand world has balanced, right? Like it was a very tenant friendly market for a very long time. Yeah. And it's suddenly a slightly more landlord favorable market, but at the same time, there's only a handful of these major tenants. You've got 10 or so, the kind of the hyperscale level tenants.
Yeah.
And you don't want to burn a bridge with any of them, because they're the machine that's going to drive all of this demand, and there's only a handful of them. So it's not like you can go, and it's a very small industry. And the guy that's head of data centers at XYZ company could very well be the head of data centers at ABC company the next week. And so, it's very important to us that no matter the customer, they have an exceptional experience and all that. So we try to be really fair. I think the biggest thing that's happened is just the volume of capital that's needed is changing the way you're having to think about how to finance these deals. I mean, it's going from, it used to be a couple $100 million to build a data center, and now you're talking a couple $1 billion to build a data center, and soon enough we're talking tens of billions of dollars. And so, how do you actually feasibly capitalize that? And even for these massive companies, it's a lot of money, and so they're having to think about how to manage that. And so I think what you're going to see is more partnership in both lease structure as well as just capitalization between firms on how to approach these big, hairy problems.
Are you seeing the power generation guys out there trying to chase sites so that they can control power to then self-generate?
Yeah, behind the meter, for sure. Yeah, that's coming. And I think there was just an announcement this morning with Google and a nuclear, I think Kairos, doing, they did a 500 megawatt behind the meter deal that was in the news. That's, and Microsoft has announced one as well, I think. And then there was the Talon Energy deal with Amazon. I mean, you're seeing all these hyperscalers are picking, that's all nuke related, but I think you will, I don't know that it'll be exactly direct on natural gas, but you are going to see some relatively direct behind the meter stuff. Just it's the only way you're going to be able to get power at certain locations.
Yeah.
But again, that's even more capital because now you're talking about putting the generation in as well.
Yeah.
So how does all of that work? It's going to be very complicated.
It's just wild the amount of capital that you're talking about. I mean, where
It's
does
crazy.
it all come from?
Yeah.
Right.
It's crazy.
I mean,
but you have to view it not as real estate at this point. It's infrastructure. This is we're talking about the internet. Like that's what it's a utility. We're not talking about this is the way society, business, commerce flows and works.
Yeah.
It's no different than building the Panama Canal. I mean, that's how you have to look. These are large scale infrastructure projects. And that's how we have to view it. And I think there's a different pool of capital that does things like, that builds ports, builds canals, builds highways and tollways and all of that's how you have to think about these things.
Yep. And really, does the cost of power even really matter anymore?
Of course it does. Yeah.
I mean, does it?
Of course it does. It's your second highest cost. So are people willing to pay up right now? We're in a space race, right? To win this technological race that we're in. So people are willing to pay a little more here or there on different levers. But to think that power costs don't matter, I think is a fallacy. It matters a lot. It's one of the reasons I like Texas. We've got good fuel mix. We've got a competitive environment here. We've got good taxes. So, I think I do think it matters. Are you going to see some deals that get done at 15 cents a kilowatt hour that don't make any sense? Maybe, but I don't think there's going to be a lot of that. I think ultimately, even on the power side, it's a function of credit and cost of capital. I mean, you're ultimately taking how many megawatts am I offloading? How long of a term of an agreement am I signing to? What credit is behind that? And it becomes a calculation on return. I mean, it's just, and that's going to get negotiated at that scale of capital to something reasonable. Normally.
Talk about the benefits to these cities, man.
There's a lot. I think the one thing data centers always get knocked on is not creating enough jobs. And I think that's totally missing the point. Data centers create lots of ancillary jobs through, if you're a software developer, if you're, if you work at the AT&T store, you need data centers to be functional.
That's right.
To empower all that technology. So data centers empower lots of jobs through an ancillary side, but when you're talking about stuff at this scale, you're talking 10 years of construction projects. So engineering firms, GCs, architects, that entire business, all of those businesses can create units that have thousands of employees on a single campus, over a long period of time. And so, our Northeast Austin campus from when we started in 21, we closed at the end of 21 to, when the final building is supposed to be done, it'll be about 7 years. That's a lot of folks employed for a meaningful period of time. So I do think, they do create jobs. We also have people that sit and work in the data center. But at the end of the day, we're not taxing. Those facilities are creating tremendous real property tax value and business property tax value. Huge.
Massive.
Billions and billions of dollars when you're talking at this kind of campus scale. And they're not taxing the civic infrastructure of those communities. So they don't need hospitals, they don't need roads, they don't need schools. And so you have this economic boon that can occur from having these facilities. Loudoun County is the best example of this in the world, where you have it's the largest data center market in the world, Northern Virginia. And the tax basis has increased like 360%, all based on data centers since it started. They were in a deficit before they did the first data center deal, and today they're in a massive surplus. If you've ever been in a Loudoun County school, boy, it's nicer than a lot of private schools you'd walk into in a lot of other places. So, data centers can be tremendously impactful, but you've got to plan around it correctly. You want to think, you want to be good neighbors, you want to be responsible in how you plan it around a city. And the nice thing is a modern data center, it's not creating a ton of noise. We have generators that do run. They're typically screening walls around that stuff that buffers the noise. We position them so they're kind of angled towards a highway or towards a roadway. Ultimately, we're usually close to louder noise sources than the building will actually be. And then an important, we often get thrown in the same bucket as crypto and stuff like that, which are open air facilities. These are all walled off buildings. The servers are creating zero noise outside of the rooms they're in.
They're
very loud.
They're prettier warehouses.
That's right. That's right.
You know?
And so you don't. There's not this big negative impact. And I think the other thing is because the caliber of companies that are leasing these spaces, we're not cutting corners on making sure that the power is distributed correctly. That, you know, it's done in a thoughtful way. That you know any community should be proud of. So that's traditionally how it goes. But I do think it's a huge benefit to the community for those reasons. But then what you don't think about is it also brings an immense amount of internet connectivity into the cities that they go into. So, and especially as we go further afoot, which AI is empowering. AI has a higher latency tolerance than many other use cases because you're shipping information. Think about a ChatGPT request. You send that's like a text. You send a prompt. It goes to a giant calculator that computes an answer, and then it's just a text back, right? But even if it's a video, you know, I mean, it's very similar to that, and so you don't need. It doesn't have to be as as low latency as streaming a Netflix show on your TV. That you don't want that, you know, buffer dial running for too long. So that's going to be cool because it's allowing us to go 20 miles outside of a city, 60 miles, 100 miles outside of a city, where we can go to smaller communities and have these big impact projects.
That's neat. And the other thing I just think it's going to be so awesome to see some of these cities that have this access to power that notoriously maybe weren't the wealthiest areas are going to be some of the wealthiest cities in the United States. I mean, it's going to be wild. Yeah, it's great. I mean, there are projects going in places where the population of the data center will be more than in the county, you know, for sure.
And so, or at least of the construction crew.
Yes.
But it's going to have a tremendous impact on a lot of these communities, and it's good stuff. And again, you know, when you think about power, we're not talking about, you know, there's 90 gigawatts or whatever on the Texas grid. That number isn't stagnant. Like, we can build new generation. We can double that. We can triple that. We can quadruple that. Ultimately, all of these buildings are also on backup generators. And so when you have emergency events, when you have Uri, when you have a hurricane, when you have a tornado, when you have something like that where the overall grid is strained, all of our facilities have the ability to go on to backup gen and give that power back to the grid. And I think we don't think about that a lot when you're thinking about traditional data centers. But at the end of the day, like, we justify the creation of new generation at scale that will ultimately benefit the communities that we're in. And so I think that's a key thing to think about when you're thinking about kind of power consumption.
So what are you most excited about next?
Man, I'm excited about getting everything built that we currently have underway. That keeps us up at night. We want to make sure we actually deliver. But all that's going really well.
How many different GCs y'all working with? Like, have you kind of zoned in
Today, we've got about 5 across 9 projects. But they're all great. And there's many that we haven't worked with that we're excited to have an opportunity to work with in the future. But, you know, we use the same architect on every project. We use the same, many of the same electrical, mechanical engineering firms. So we have kind of an extended design team that's on every deal. And that serves us really well because they're not learning the Skybox model. You know, they know it better than I do.
Right. How early are we in this data center boom game? Like, where are we in
It's really hard to say, but I think if AI is anywhere close to as real as the financial investments that the large creators of AI are making right now, I think the game just started. I think we just got out of the tailgate. This was an article the other day. It was kind of the 5 big cloud service providers that are doing AI. Their projected annual spend over the next 12 months is $225 billion just on data centers. $225 billion in 12 months. And it's insane. And so if that's accurate, I mean, you just can't imagine they're all wrong, you know? And so I think the reality is this is just getting started. And I think the impact we're going to see this technology have on the way our lives work is we're just scratching the surface.
Incredible.
So hopefully it'll be amazing.
That was incredible, Haynes. I know you're short on time, so I'm just gonna blow through a couple what I call the C-suite closers, and wrap this puppy up for you. But what's something that most people don't know about you?
I'm a pretty open book. So
Yeah.
I'm a huge Star Wars nerd. That'd be one.
We got a favorite character at Star Wars?
I'm a big Darth Vader fan.
Really?
Big believer in Darth. Yeah.
Interesting.
Excellent motivator.
Yeah.
But and self-made, but
Not a Boba Fett guy, huh?
not a big Boba Fett guy. No,
Okay.
I respect Boba Fett, but
Yeah.
no, I always liked Obi-Wan and Darth
Incredible.
Vader.
Yeah.
If you were to pick one on each side.
Yeah.
But I think I'm trying to think what else would be interesting. I think the big classical music guy. That's probably something I don't share. very often.
Interesting.
Yeah. So
Okay.
during the working day when I'm not on the phone, there's
Classical
something
music.
blasting in my ear. Yeah,
Okay.
All
All right, that's a good one. I like that. What most impactful book you've read? Either recently or all time?
Man, that's a good question. I think, so recently, I'm not going to remember the name of it, but it was William Vanderbilt's biography, which is fascinating. It was written like 20 years ago, but fascinating.
Okay.
It's all, he started racing or doing steamboats as a ferry system across the Hudson in New York. And he wrecked intentionally several times into other steamboat operators, killing several people in his competitive edge to win at the steamboat ferry business.
Wow.
He created a big part of the train transit system. And he was literally a titan of the way America worked. And I just didn't know any of that. And it was a fascinating biography. And I'm totally blanking on the name of it. And then I think another one, Next 100 Years by George Friedman, who's an Austin strategic, consultant guy that thinks about the way the world works.
Yep.
You can go reread that now. I read it probably 10 years ago. I think it was written in like 2006 or something.
Okay.
It's all about how the macro world has changed over the last 100 years. You used to, the family system.
Yep.
You got married and had a lot of kids because you needed children to survive, to work the farm, and you were going to lose a few to disease. In today's world, the family dynamic looks very different. Children are now a luxury, not a necessity.
Yeah.
That changes whether you get married or not. It changes the way you think about a lot of different things. He very correctly articulates some of the issues we're seeing in authoritarian governments around the country today. But he basically predicts half of it is understanding what the big trends were over the last 100 years and how they changed. And then he predicts where he thinks that's going to impact hotspots around the world and talks about China and the Middle East. And that's probably my favorite book I've ever read. It's a good one.
I'll check that out. You already kind of hit on it a little bit, but what's on your Spotify playlist other than your classical music?
I'm all over the place. I love the Chili Peppers. They're always that's my favorite band by far. That's the only
How many times have we seen Flea? And
at least 6.
Okay,
but that's one of the few. If they ever go to the Sphere, I'll be in the first iteration of that.
Okay,
but I've got a lot of country, a lot of rock and roll. I love like Frank Sinatra, 50s kind of swing music, stuff like that. Big band, love that stuff.
That's good stuff.
So I'm all over the place.
Favorite country guy?
A lot of Disney right now for the school commute to drop Charlotte off.
Yeah, I mean, if we had a favorite country artist, though, who would it be? If you could only listen to one?
Man, if I could only listen to one, it's probably Hank Williams.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
It's probably Hank Williams.
That's pretty good.
He's good.
If you could have coffee with one historical or famous figure other than the Vanderbilt, who would you choose?
I'd probably go sit down with Elon Musk. I know it's not historical, but if I was going to go pick somebody's brain and the issues that we're dealing with today, I'd love to talk to Elon Musk. I think he's just fascinating. He's done more for humanity. Either way, any way you look at it, it's amazing.
Favorite thing about Dallas?
The people.
Yeah.
I think Dallas, Dallas gets a bad rep because people build bigger houses next to each other and compete over Christmas lights and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, I've never met a more welcoming community of people that want to help other people be successful. And I've found that to be very true in most aspects of my life.
What's your favorite restaurant in town? Where do you like to go?
It depends on the occasion.
Sure.
If I'm taking somebody not from Dallas, Javier's is, of course, number one.
I was there Friday night. Incredible.
It's the best. It's the best. And it's such a institution.
Really is. I hope it never goes away.
Yeah. It's great. And then if not, Christine and I go to Lover Seafood a lot. We like that.
It's a good spot.
It's good, calm.
It's a good spot.
Walkable from our house.
What about Dunstan's back room? You ever go
I like
there?
Dunstan's. I mean,
the salad bar is incredible.
It's pretty good. Yeah.
I'm all about impacting others. Talk about some charities or give back or stuff that you're passionate about.
Sure. I give to lots of different things. I think the things we're most involved with right now is the Rise School in Dallas.
Yeah.
My 4-year-old went there for several years, and now our 1.5-year-old's there, and it just was an amazing experience. It's an amazing group of people, and it's amazing what they do for kids that really need that kind of resource and their families. But I'm most involved at SMU. That's where I spend most of my free time.
That's awesome.
I'm a big believer in not pulling the ladder up from under you, and if anything, throwing down a couple more.
Sure.
And SMU did that in so many different ways for me. And so whether it's I'm involved with Dedman College, the Folsom Institute, the Tower Center, and I've just found it to be so rewarding. I've met with 3 SMU students today. I mean, it just happens. My calendar will get booked up. So it's not loving how popular data centers have become. I'm suddenly inundated with. I appreciated it when we were a little quieter in the corner. But it's
a lot of requests.
There's a lot of that, but it's good. It's good that people appreciate it, and it's
sure.
I view us all as just glorified plumbers. At the end of the day, we're just building the pipes and the toilets that make the whole system work.
Right.
And you don't really want to know how it works. You just want it to work.
Maybe glorified cable guys.
Yeah.
I don't know about plumbers, right?
Yeah.
Cable guy.
Yeah.
Such a great one. Well, Haynes, thanks for taking the time to come on today, brother.
Of course.
I really appreciate you sharing what's going on in this space, and I'll always be rooting for you, my man.
It's great to see you. Thanks for having me.